Welcome back to this 4-part tutorial series where we're making this super cool sort of thingy in this dark space. And we're looking at 3 different lighting techniques to add some extra realism and extra excitement to your scenes. So in the last tutorial, we just made the scene that you see here. And in this one, we're going to look at volumetric lighting. The next one, we're going to add some atmospheric particles. And then in the last tutorial, we're going to add some lens flares and have a look at lens flare effects. So yeah, it's super easy. There's 2 ways to add volumetrics to your scene. The first is adding it to the world. So if I were to split my view here, just by right clicking on that bar there and clicking vertical split, and then going to my shader editor and then jumping from object into world. This is my world lighting. And in the first tutorial, we actually disconnected this one because it just sort of creates this horrible flat lighting, which we don't want. So in fact, I can just delete that with X. And then yeah, adding volume is as easy as pressing Shift A, searching for volume scatter, hitting enter, and plugging that into the volume node. Now it's going to go black just because the density is, well, really dense. If your fog's too dense, no light's going to get through. So if I make that 0.01, you can see that it's now a lot less foggy. And yeah, we've got volumetrics in our scene. It's as easy as that. Now you just want to make sure you're in cycles, GPU compute, and you've got your render viewport shading on there so you can see that. But yeah, that's added volume to our scene. Now, the only downside to using this method and not the other method, which I'll go into in a second, is that it puts an infinite amount of volume in your scene. So if you're using a HDRI to light your scene, you can see that nothing happens, and that is because we put an infinite amount of fog into our scene. If you want to use a HDRI and volume, you're going to have to use this second technique here. And that is, instead of scattering the volume throughout the whole world, it's just on a single object, which is not infinite in size. So I can just do Shift A, add a cube. I can scale that up with S. And then I can take this cube, go into Object, create a new material. I can delete this Principled BSDF with X. I can then add my volume scatter node by Shift A again, typing in scatter, and connecting the volume to the volume. And you can see that's made a very sort of thick, dense volume. And like I said before, that makes the light not pass through because it is way too thick. Actually, if I zoom in there, you can see it is very, very sort of dense. But if I drop the density to 0.01, you can see that now the HDRI is shining through. And as long as your camera is inside of this cube, you pretty much are not going to see that cube, and you get the fog and you get all the HDRI lighting. Now, for the purposes of creating our cool animation, we don't really want HDRI lighting. So if I just turn on my overlays there by clicking this button, I can just delete that cube, go back to the world lighting, and reconnect our volume scatter, and also delete the HDRI because we don't need that. And I can then just take this back to the 3D viewport so we can add some lights. So I'm just going to jump into the camera on this side so I can see what I'm doing, and also just turn off the overlays so I have an unobstructed view there. And actually, to get an even better idea of what I'm seeing, I'm just going to turn everything outside the camera black just by selecting the camera, going down to the camera data there, going into viewport display and changing that to 1, and that's just going to make everything outside the camera black. So it gives me a better idea of what I'm sort of going to have as a final frame. Now we've got a volume. Obviously we've got the light in. It's sort of like washing out everything, and I want to create a bit more shape in my scene. So a really nice technique to use with volumes is spotlights. So if I just turn that on, you can see you get this really cool sort of dramatic lighting, which is nice. Probably just make this a bit brighter, 5,000, and then I'm going to just place this off to the side there. Now I want this to point towards my thing here in the middle, and you can do that by grabbing this yellow toggle and pointing it to the middle, just dragging it over that cube there. But that's quite a tedious way to move the light around, because if I wanted to try in a different position, then I'm going to have to do that again. And then if I wanted to try in a different position, I'm going to have to do that again, which is annoying. So you can actually just go down to the constraints with your point light selected, then click on Add Object Constraint and click Track To. And as you might imagine, you can use that to track to stuff. So I'm just going to press Shift A, add an empty plane axis, click on my light, click on this little eyedropper, and then click on that empty. And that's going to make sure my spotlight is always pointing at this empty, which is pretty cool. And that's just going to help me find a nice frame here for my lighting. I'm just going to put it sort of top left of frame, and I'm going to put it behind it. I think that sort of creates a nice light. I'm also going to go down to the data thing here. And because we've got a red sort of light in the middle, I'm going to choose a sort of complementary color there, just to create a bit of color contrast. Blue's quite nice. So I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to make the spotlight size a little smaller, maybe 30 degrees. That's too small. Oh, that's 20, 30. There you go. Now we get this cool sort of cone light, which is really nice. Let's see. If I press G and Shift Z, I can move it on a local axis there. I kind of want to see, you know what? I might point the light down a bit so I can select that empty that we've checked it to, press GZ to move it down. So it's sort of pointing more towards that. And I'm actually going to select my floor and move it down a bit as well, I think. And then to make your light slightly more realistic, if I click on it, you can see the radius is currently 0. So the light is being emitted from an infinitely small point, which is completely unrealistic, because whether it's the sun, a studio light, or the light in your kitchen or your monitor, it's not coming from an infinitely small space. It's being emitted from a larger area, whether that's the whole area of the light bulb or whatever. So you actually get a much more realistic look if you make this radius slightly bigger. If it happens in real life, you should try and emulate it in your render. And that's going to soften these shadows. So maybe 0.2, and you can see that it sort of softens them out a bit more. So if I jump back into my camera view, you can see we've got quite a cool looking shot there with the volume. And yeah, that's just a super quick and easy tutorial on how to create volumetric lighting and light shafts in Blender. It's going to add a lot to your scenes, so chuck it wherever you go, just be wary, it will slow down your render time. And yeah, in the next tutorial, we're going to look at adding some particles to the atmosphere. You can use those across a range of different projects, whether it looks like embers sort of burning or like dust in the atmosphere. They're super useful to know how to use, and they'll elevate your render. So yeah, let me know if you've got any questions down in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one.